Well, welcome. Good afternoon, everybody in local government, and welcome to the Lunch and Learn series. This is the first time the executive series is being run, so it's very exciting for me to see this up and running, and we've got a huge audience in this broadcast, which is really great to hear and see. Look, those of you who are new to this medium, that is webinars, I'll just explain a few things to you that might be helpful. Just over on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there's a little question box. If you open that up, I'll just get you, if you don't mind, if you could just type in the word clear, because I just want to make sure that I am clear, that I'm coming across loud and clear, because obviously I don't want to be talking to myself for a long period of time. So great, thank you, Joe. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Michelle. Great. Okay. Looks like, thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Blake. Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'm coming across loud and clear, which is good to know. Now, the other thing about that box there that's really important is that if you've got questions or statements or anything at all that you'd like to, make a comment about or ask me a question, that's the place to do it. I mean, obviously I can't unmute everybody. I mean, if I did that, we'd have all the background noise in the world and so forth. So the best way we can make this interactive is for you to actually ask a question when you think about it. And what I'll do is I'll stop the broadcast at that time and respond to the question. So that's the key thing to do there, which is great. We've got people all over the state, which is wonderful in local government, and it's a big state. So, it's great to know that. So, guys, the other thing is that what will happen is that you will get a copy of the recording and the slides at the end of this. So what happens is I interact with you in between these sessions, so that you actually get a recording, which I'm recording now, and then you get the slides as well. So if for any reason that you're on leave or you just can't make a meeting as such, don't stress. You'll have a recording to be able to listen to, or at least look through the slides. Having said that, I strongly urge you to diarise these six one-on-one broadcast, these six broadcasts, for the simple reason that it just creates a discipline. I mean, one of the great disadvantages of using webinar technology is that, because it's done via the computer, busyness can get in the way, and you can kind of just think, well, I won't worry about it. I'll pick up on the recording later on. Of course, if you're going to a workshop or a seminar or something, you can be conspicuous by your absence, and so you sort of make an extra effort to get there. The advantage, of course, of this technology is that you can do this, although it's a little bit after lunch today, but you can do it over lunch most of the time, and you don't have all the travel that's involved and the costs involved with that. So that's the plus side. So there are upsides and downsides for this technology. Anyway, let's get underway. I'm now going to you can see it there. It'll come up on your screen. There's often a delay on the screen. Excuse me. There it is. You can see what the program entails, and you can see what the 6 units are about. Now, you might know that I've swapped units 1 and 2, and there's a reason for that, because there's a diagnostic to do for the unit on enhancing your influence. And I'm going to get you to do this profile between now and the next time we meet, so that the whole idea is that I will be debriefing you during the 2nd unit. So I'll basically go through the influencing capabilities framework during unit 2, and it was not physically possible to get people to complete this before today. We had people enrolling as late as yesterday, so it wasn't going to happen. So that's why we've swapped those two around. So we're going to look, of course, at strategically managing performance up front, which is, of course, a big issue in local government, and in fact everywhere for that matter. Is how can we enhance our performance? The truth of the matter is local government, like everywhere else, is under pressure budgetary-wise. Ratepayers can't just cop constant increases in rates without commensurate increases in services. And so what it means is that all of us have to be smarter about how we manage our performance in our workplace. So in Unit 3, we'll look at creating time and basically time management, but with a slightly different focus. I think all of you in this broadcast are busy people. I have no doubt about that. I know I'm busy. We're all busy. There's no such thing anymore as idle time. So the truth of the matter is we've got to create spaces in our day and our opportunities so that we can actually spend time thinking. I don't mean daydreaming, I mean thinking. We as leaders are actually in the business of thinking. I don't mean just sitting there thinking, but basically just taking stock of what's happening. But because of the enormous pressure that we're under in modern life, we often don't get the chance to do that. So I want to address that issue during Unit 3. We're going to look at options for organisational structuring. Now, all local government authorities in Queensland are very much structured the same way. So we have a very hierarchical situation where there are a number of silos, and that's one of the issues with local government, as you know, is this silo mentality that people often don't talk to people in other departments or whatever, or if they do it on a minimal basis. So I want to talk about some other particular ways that we might be able to structure departments, organisations, and give you some food for thought. And if you're in a position where you might be able to do something about that, you might be able to apply some of those particular strategies in your own organisation. We're going to look at conflict, and there'll be another diagnostic there actually. We're going to look at managing conflict, and I mean conflict negotiation, the same sort of things. A negotiation is a conflict in the sense that there are two opposite views, and somewhere in the middle we've got to find some resolution. So we'll look at conflict and negotiation because at a senior level, that becomes a really important task for you to do. You'll be doing that on a regular basis. So getting good at that is really important. And of course, change management. We're all under change, we're all under pressure, we're all trying to change and do things differently, faster, easier, better. So we'll actually look at some concepts around change management, which I think you might find interesting. So I'm hoping you get a lot out of the program, and I'm looking forward to working with you over the next several months. And you can interact with me in between sessions. That's part of the deal. So by all means, send me an email. Let me know what you're trying. If you've got questions or issues, by all means, send them to me because I will be quite receptive. I can't promise I will respond to it immediately, but I try to get back to people within 24 hours. So certainly happy to do that. All right, so today, let's move on. So today we're going to look at performance management, pretty much from a strategic point of view. I just want to raise a few issues about performance management, which I want to get you to think about, and perhaps you might apply some of these things in your own workplace. And I've had a lot of experience in local government over a long period of time. I pretty much know how the whole thing works. Probably well over 10, maybe 15 years I've been doing work in local government at different, I may well have come across you at different times. There aren't too many councils in Queensland that I haven't done some sort of consulting with. So I'm pretty familiar with the terrain and how it works. So I'll tailor my comments pretty much around local government as such. Okay. All right. So there's three things that I was hoping that we will get out of today's process, and I'm just going to minimize my screen so that I can see what I'm doing. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So I'm going to share with you a performance management framework, which it's not necessarily rocket science, but I think it's important for us to understand the different component parts that are in performance management and how you might deal with those parts better. So we're going to look at that. I actually want to spend a fair bit of time talking about the job description, because at the end of the day, that's the building block for performance, isn't it? And by the way, I'm not a huge believer in job descriptions. I'm not suggesting we should just allow people to do whatever they want. I still believe that there should be a work document, but I'm not convinced that the job description is the right work document. And I'll talk a little bit about that later too. And then I want to talk about performance and developmental conversations. At the end of the day, I think these are critically important. And from my experience in local government, there aren't enough conversations going on that are people-centred. I find that most of the conversations are very much around projects and work, and of course, lots of conversations have to be around that. But I think I'd like to redress that balance somewhat, because at the end of the day, if you actually think about it, any workplace, whether it's your industry in local government or anywhere else, is based on the concept that it's a bunch of people working towards a common cause, right? The emphasis on a bunch of people. So we're dealing with human beings, and I think human beings, of course, have certain needs, and I think what we need to do is to understand that the conversation has a critically important component part in performance. So I want to spend a bit of time at the end on that, if I may. So they're the three things that that I'm hoping that you get from the process. What you can see in front of you here is this is a framework I put together quite a few years ago, but I think at the end of the day it's a good place to start, and I'm just going to minimize that so I can see what I'm doing. So these are all the component parts, if you like, for performance planning, if you like. So you can see at the top you've got the vision. All councils in Queensland have got a vision statement. I might say some of them aren't terribly inspiring. I'll say that much without sounding too rude about it. But you know, I think a lot of them could be a little bit more inspirational. But never mind, we'll get to that. The vision is the vision really is about where we're intending to go over the next 5 years in our corporate plan. That's essentially what that's about. The mission, of course, is how we get there. And of course, there's a lot of misunderstanding between mission and vision, but mission is the how-to, how are we actually going to get there. And so, so where are we going, how are we going to get there is number two. Number three is a set of organisational values. These are the values that govern our behaviour internally, which hopefully will be consistent with what we're trying to achieve in the vision. I think sometimes we use too many values. I've seen some organisations have got 8 or more values. It's too many. People can't remember all that. And it's just unwieldy, frankly. And I actually think, you know, whittling it down to about 4 values is is great, because people can remember it, and it forces people to make priorities and say, well, if there were 4 values that we could have in this organisation, what would they be? So we'll talk a bit more about that as well. And then, of course, you've got 5-year goals, and so our whole corporate plan is based on the concept of the 5-year goals. So we pick our 5-year goals, and then, of course, what we have is objectives, which normally go for 12 months. So the objectives are very much the outcomes of where we hope to be in a 12-month period on the way to achieving our goals. Then we've got the strategies. These are the ways and means of being able to achieve our objectives. And then there are certain people who are accountable for certain things in organisations, so that becomes a series of accountabilities. And the building block, as I mentioned before, is the position description, or what we commonly refer to as the job description. So everyone ends up with a piece of paper or two or three, which pretty much outlines what they're expected to do in the operation. And then, of course, once a year we have these performance appraisals where we sit down with people and give them some feedback based on the key result areas that are in the job description and the key performance indicators, which help to determine whether the key result areas are actually achieved. So it's just good to get this in your head, because obviously if any of these things go missing, or they're done in a substandard way, what actually happens is that you've got a suboptimal performance. So the strategic plan is really around the top 4 layers, in my view. So it's really around the vision and the mission and the values and the goals. And then you've got the operational plan. This is how we're going to actually operationalize or give expression to the strategic plan, which includes the objectives, the strategies and accountabilities. And then below that, we've got how the performance management system, and how we're actually going to manage achieving these particular goals or objectives to help us achieve the strategic plan, which ultimately is all about the vision. So that's how it should work. And I suspect that travelling around Queensland over the years, most councils have got a pretty good handle on that. I don't necessarily think that all councils are doing it very well, but I think most people have got most of the bases covered. And, if you said to me, where should I start with managing performance? We really need to start from scratch. My response to you would be to make sure that all of these particular elements of performance planning are actually done, because this is what I would refer to as the framework of performance. So if this isn't done correctly and well, then you're going to have issues down the track with performance. Unfortunately, it's a work in progress. It never really finishes, because another 5 years comes in, you've got a new corporate plan, new way of looking at things. You've got developments that occur in the community. You've got new positions that are created as a response to that. So these things, once the document's written, doesn't necessarily mean it's cast in stone, nor should it be even. So that's the performance plan. Now, this will come up on your screen in a moment. Okay. Whoop, gone again. Here we go. So why in heaven's name have I got a coat hanger right on the page there? What in heaven's name is all that about? Well, I like to think, and in fact I wrote about it in one of my books, I like to think that the actual vision of an organisation is like a coat hanger. What do I mean by that? Well, every one of us has got plenty of coat hangers in the cupboard. In fact, it's fair to say we've got too many most of the time, and they can be quite a nuisance. Okay, and so can a vision. It's on the wall. People walk past it, don't take much notice of it. Can be a bit of a waste of space. Why don't we put a painting there or something? So that's the first correlation. I think the other thing about the coat hanger is that the coat hanger, of course, is very useful to hang things from. So garments, trousers, shirts, whatever it might be, can be hung from a coat hanger. And in fact, the coat hanger actually shapes the garment. So, if people have got very nice dresses or nice suits or whatever, they might use a very nice coat hanger, because the coat hanger itself will shape the garment. And that's exactly what should happen with a vision statement, that the vision statement should shape the way we do things in the workplace. And in fact, vision statements on their own are useless. They're just words, aren't they? They're just a sentence full of words. But so is a coat hanger. A coat hanger is pretty useless too, unless we hang something off it. So the coat hanger itself is not useful unless it's being used for the purposes to which it was designed, which of course was hanging garments from, and the same with the vision statement. So there is a lot of commonality there, and of course sometimes we underestimate the importance of coat hangers. We underestimate the importance of a vision as well, and sometimes we need to think differently about what the coat hanger can actually achieve, because it can do other things, can't it, besides simply hanging garments from. There are other things that it can do as well. So it can be quite a useful tool. So the thing about a vision statement is, and look, you know and I know there's some really uninspiring vision statements around in local government in Queensland, to do the very best for the community or whatever. Doesn't do a lot for me personally, and I would have thought that that would be a given anyway. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that you get all excited about this and go out of here and write a new vision statement. But I think it's important to just give this some consideration, because a good vision statement is short. I've seen some vision statements go for a page. Now, I'm just not going to read that. So it should be one simple sentence. It doesn't even actually have to be a sentence, truth be known. But it needs to be inspiring. And that's important. It needs to have some inspiration to it. Why? Well, we want people to believe in it. We want people to buy into it. So it has to be inspiring. It is also really an opportunity to set priorities. So if we've got several things that we could do, and the vision statement staring us in the face, then doing what's on the vision statement becomes the critically important part. So it actually helps us to set key priorities, which is very, very important. It also reminds us of who our customers are, and we know who our customers are. I mean, if I ask you, you'll be able to tell me. They're the members of the community of which you serve, the ratepayers and so forth. But I think, well, we all do. We all lose sight of the customers, don't we, at times, and we forget that we're there. The only reason that we're actually existing, the only reason that you're listening to me now is because you've got a job in a local government environment, and the only reason that you've got a job in the local government environment is that there's revenues to sustain your role. So clearly customers have got a big say and influence in terms of what we do. The only reason that I've got an opportunity to talk to you today is because there are customers in your community. So it really should, the vision should say something about that. It also should give us a sense of direction. So what it means is that we kind of know where we're heading. So what should really happen is that the direction, the vision, I should say, everything that we say, think and do in local government should be connected directly or indirectly to the vision. That's how it should work. Now, I know a lot of things don't happen that way, but let me just repeat that. Everything that's said, done, or thought about should be either directly or indirectly linked to the vision statement. That's how it should work. But of course, if you went outside and picked 10 people and asked them to recite your council's vision, I'll guarantee you they wouldn't know, or probably wouldn't know. They might have some idea, but they probably don't. So that in itself is very, very interesting. So we need something that gets people inspired, I guess. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is the strategic part of the framework that I went through before. And the questions that are critical on that page are the questions that come under each of the headings. There we go, it's come up now. It's gone again. There it is. Magic, he says. How does he know that? Anyway, I can get your vision about what you're seeing too. So The vision statement is, where does the organisation want to be in 5 years, as I mentioned before. Why 5 years? Well, 5 years in this day and age is an eternity, isn't it? 5 years in the 20th century was nothing. Now it's quite a long time, because a lot of things can happen and change in 5 years. And of course, our whole corporate planning process works on the 5-year principle. Values are, what are the values that will enable us to achieve our vision? So what are the key things? So if the vision's got something about innovation in it, it's probably important that there's a value about innovation, or at least continuous improvement there in amongst those values. The mission, of course, is how we will achieve that vision, and that becomes the way we go about it. And the 5-year goals is the goals that we've set for ourselves over a 5-year period. So that part, of course, is probably very much at the forefront of your mind in terms of performance. So you can probably see that if we don't get that right, we're going to have a few problems by the time it gets down to the coalface and what people are supposed to do in their work. So that's how it works. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, if I may briefly, is this whole concept of values. Not so much the values that I just shared or talked to you about before, but there's a lot of stress in local government at the moment, I find, throughout Queensland, and the stress is very much based on a lot of it's generational. Young people, and of course there's not as many young people coming into local government as there should be, but young people coming into local government often have a different set of values to we baby boomers. You may not be a baby boomer, but I am, but and they have a different set of values. And I think it's important for us to understand what's happening out there, because if we're really interested in performance, we need to understand the changing employment relationship values. So for about 200 years, more than 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, the employment relationship, that is, managers and workforce, has been pretty much stable and predictable. And then around the 1980s, the whole relationship unraveled, because what happened then, and you may have had relatives in this situation, what happened then is a lot of people's jobs disappeared. A lot of middle managers were thrown on the scrap heap. They were thrown out of their companies. They'd given their whole life service to the organisation, but they were told that there was no more. And of course, once they had been made redundant, they felt pretty bitter about the whole thing, on the basis that they'd given a good chunk of their life to this one organisation, as you did then in the 20th century. So the whole employment relationship unraveled around that time. So what you're seeing on your screen, if I could just run through it with you without going into great detail, because you'll get these slides later, is what's on the left-hand side are the old values. These are the values of the traditional employment relationship. These are the values that both the managers and workforce share and have shared for over 200 years. You might say, well, why is there 8? Why not 12? Why not 3? Well, I would suspect there's more than 8, but my work only covered 8. But I'm more than happy for people to add more to that than if they choose. So what you might notice if you're looking at the list on the right-hand side is the list on the right hand are diametrically opposite to the list on the left-hand side. In other words, these are exactly the opposite values to what's on the left-hand side. So the new values that I'm sharing there are the values that are being embraced by not only younger workers. I shouldn't generalize too much like that, but you'll find a lot of millennials will share the values that are on the right-hand side. And this can be a source of tension in organisations, because if you've got a baby boomer manager that embraces the values on the left-hand side, and you've got a baby boomer coming in embracing the values on the right-hand side, it's likely to create some source of tension in the organisation. So let me give you a really good example. An old value was that, bosses would do the leading and, workforce would do the doing. So if you had a boss who had a very traditional notion of their role, they're probably likely not to engage their team in much discussion around decision making. Probably what's going to happen is that they would just make the decision and let people know about that. By the same token, if that traditional boss was dealing with an employee who had a different set of values, that is, a more contemporary set of values, like the ones on the right-hand side, they might be super critical of that boss on the basis that they feel that he or she isn't engaging them enough in the decision-making process. Right? That's how the tension could unravel. It could work in reverse too. You could have a very modern manager who embraces values on the right-hand side, who is trying to engage his or her team in decision making, and one of the employees in that team happens to have a very traditional notion of their role, and they believe in the values on the left-hand side. Well, they're very likely to think that that manager is quite weak and indecisive, and really he should be making his own decisions and not checking with us every few minutes. So that at least would be their interpretation of the manager's behaviour by wanting to engage people in decision making. So you see, these tensions are all over the place. They're in your workplace, I dare say. They're in doesn't matter what industry. They're all, and so because I think what's happening is that we're in flux between the old and the new. So that's the employment relationship. That can be quite difficult. So let's move on. What I want to talk about is I want to move into some areas where you can be quite constructive and you can do some good things, or at least sponsor some good things inside local government. I've made a very provocative statement up on the screen, and it should be coming up soon. By the way, guys, if you've got any questions, any comments, any observations, please put them in the question box. Don't be shy, and I will certainly respond to those as soon as I see them up on the screen, because that's our way of making this as interactive as possible. All right, well, you can see on your screen now what the slide's saying. It's saying that the roles people play in organisations are more important than the jobs they do. Now, that sounds like a pretty provocative statement, doesn't it? But I think it's true. I'm not suggesting that the work that people do technically isn't important. Of course it is. But at least as equally important, if not more important, is the actual roles they play. What do I mean by that? Well, have a look at this. What I'm going to do now is share with you a model, and I want to talk about performance that goes beyond the job description. I want to talk about performance in a broader sense. So let's just first of all get this up on the screen. So the work that people do. Now, the work that people do can be divided into two dimensions. One dimension of the work that people do is that they have a job role. In other words, the job description outlines what they're expected to do in their job role. And this is essentially about their technical capabilities. And that gets in their job role, and there it is, and people are managed on that performance. Right, but that's only half the story. And herein lies the problem that we have in terms of being able to increase performance in local government. There is another dimension that often escapes the job description, and this dimension I refer to as the non-job roles. So these are important roles that people play in organisations that aren't necessarily directly written in the job description. They may well be included in the job description, but normally they're there as bullet points towards the end of the document. And this is where I think some real inroads can be made. Now, I looked at this very closely, and in my own consulting world, I work across 21 industries, of which local government is one industry. So I applied these 4 non-job roles to all those industries, and I found that they were all applicable. So again, there's probably more, but let's just stick with 4 for the time being. And the first non-job role that I would be expecting people to play in any workplace where I was the leader would be that I'd expect people to have a positive mental attitude and to show some enthusiasm. Now, I'm not for a minute expecting that people will come to work bouncing off the walls, all excited and so forth. That's not what I'm on about. What I am on about is people playing a role of not being negative, of backbiting, finger pointing, and playing political games and all of this sort of thing. And of course, you know who I'm talking about. All organisations have got people that will spend an inordinate amount of time doing just that. And in my view, it just completely destroys the fabric of the organisation. And the reason we often let sleeping dogs lie and don't confront people about that is because it's not necessarily documented anywhere. It also, because people might think, you might think that the person that you're talking to about this, they might think, well, you're not being very objective about this, you're being very subjective. So there's a range of possible responses that you might get when you're dealing with that. But look, let's face it, can you imagine what your organisation would be like if everyone there had a rotten attitude and a lack of enthusiasm? It wouldn't matter how technically focused and brilliant people were. If that was the case, you would have some serious problems in that workplace. So that's one role that I think is quite relevant and important for people, what I expect people to play in the workplace. Another role that I expect that people will play in the workplace, increasingly more so now, is that I expect people to work in teams. I actually expect people to be team players. And I don't think, again, that this is an unreasonable expectation. I've had people say to me in local government, look, I just come to work, I do what's on my job description, I don't like working in teams, I can be a little bit difficult at times, but so what? Well, it actually does matter, and it's a bit of a cop-out, and I think people do have a right to expect that people will operate and function effectively in a team. We're always going to have conflict and that sort of thing, but it's more than reasonable to expect people to be playing a role as a team player in the workplace of 2017. The third area that's important is that we expect people to develop themselves continuously. But again, we often hear people saying, well, you know what, I've stopped learning, or I've done my degree, or I'm too old to learn anything new. You hear all these excuses all the time. In my view, what they're really making a statement about is that I'm going backwards, because obviously everybody's moving forward. So again, I don't think it's negotiable. I think it is, even though it's become a cliche, we do talk about lifelong learning, and we do believe that it is real. You've got to become a lifelong learner. That's what you're doing today. Everyone's got to do that, and I think it's a reasonable expectation that people will do that. So that one's really about working on yourself, whereas the final role is working on the efficiencies and effectiveness of the organisation. So this is around innovation and continuous improvement. So how can we make our organisation more efficient and effective? Everybody has a role to play in that regard. And I expect people to bring their ideas to work. I expect them to contribute to the betterment of the workplace generally and what we can do about that. And so, some of these ideas aren't necessarily going to cost you a fortune. Some of them can be, you know, quite cost effective as such. Excuse me. So they're the 4 non-job roles. Now you might think, well, you know, I agree with all that stuff, but how do we measure people on all that, and how do we judge performance on all those things? Well, the very first thing you've got to do is to develop what I call a role description. So what is a role description? A role description covers both the job role and the non-job roles. So at the moment, a job description only covers the job role. So what we do is we broaden the document to include both job and non-job roles. Now, basically what that means is that you have somebody who has 5 roles to play in the organisation. They have a job role, they have an attitude role, they have a team development role, they have a self-development role, and they have an innovation and continuous improvement role. And under each of those categories, there are key result areas that need to be met. So I guess what I'm trying to do is just to broaden the discussion to say that if you're really serious about strategically managing performance, then you really can't bypass the non-job roles that people play. And one of the reasons that people don't take non-job roles seriously, and I'm not talking necessarily about you, I'm talking about some of the people that you might lead, is that it's not taken seriously organisationally. At the very best, we usually have a few bullet points that are written at the back of the work document to indicate what's important, but that's about it. So why don't we bring them front and centre if we think they're so important? Now, if you doubt they're important, have a look at this feedback. I'm going to put these all up, so save me clicking through. A little bit of research was done a couple of years ago by a guy named John Warner, who basically interviewed 9,000 people for the Harvard Business Review, and he asked people, what was the key attributes that you were looking for in a new employee? That was the question. What was the key attribute, I should say, singular, not plural. And what you're seeing there is a frequency of all of the responses that came back across 21 industries across 3 continents. And you'll notice something very interesting about the 10 things. The 10 things that are up there, none of those have got anything to do with the job role. All 10 of those are actually non-job specific. So I'm just using this to make a very important point that we all value non-job behaviour a lot more highly than we probably think we do. When we're asked a question about what are the attributes we're looking for in a new employee, we are getting a lot of feedback that indicates that people want people to perform in these non-job role capacities. So I just want to make that point before you dismiss that and think, oh, well, we're happy, we've got job descriptions and all the rest of it. Let me make a further point that might make this even more insightful for people. You will notice there that what this chart is showing you is the life cycle of an employee. So when an employee comes in an organisation, they go through different phases, and you could almost have another one there saying termination or something like that, or retirement. So I make the comment over the right-hand side that the negative impact of the job description occurs right throughout the life cycle of an employee. Now let me explain that a bit further. If you look at recruitment and selection, for example, how do we recruit and select people traditionally? Well, we get out the job description, we look at the technical information, we look at the key performance indicators, and then we craft a number of questions to elicit from the candidates their responses to a number of job a number of things in their job description. Now, what happens is we don't tend to ask any questions about whether they're a team player, their ideas and thoughts around innovation and continuous improvement. We don't tend to ask anything about them doing lots of things, and that becomes problematic because it's only later on after probation that we find out that we're in trouble when we probably should have looked at that earlier. Just got a question or a statement here, and I'm just going, I've got a couple here. So, yeah, Blake, I'll come to you. Hi, Tim. How do you boost the positive and mental attitude and enthusiasm when morale is down across the majority of the organisation, not just one or two staff? Yeah, look, this thing ebbs and flows, Blake, and, it's got to be a conscious project from the leader. And, well, of course, the first question to ask is why is morale down? And obviously, if you can address that issue, then you're a long way ahead of being able to resolve the morale issue. But look, I think it really does depend on why it is and where it's coming from and what the reason for that is. It's just as easy to have a positive attitude as it is to have a negative attitude. It's just for some reason we like to focus. And another thing that's important is that for you to set a good example. There's no point in you getting mired into this negativity as well. You need to keep yourself up and at it as well. But look, the key answer to your question is why is morale low? And then I would probably get several employees together in a small team, and I'd work with them and say, what are we going to do, guys? I'd like your input on how we might address the low morale that we have in the organisation. I might start by saying, how would you rate our morale on a scale of 1 to 10? And then the second question I might ask is why? And then the third question I might ask is, what are we going to do about it? And start looking at some very practical and tangible ways to be able to fix it. But you don't have to do that on your own. Your job is to facilitate a process by which that happens. So thanks, mate. Great question. And of course, many of us have been faced with that problem as well. Okay, just see if there's any other questions. Thought there was another one there. No. Oh, here we go. Okay, I won't read out the organisation, but it says we did an employee engagement survey, which helps us to get a better understanding of employee perceptions and morale issues. We now have a detailed understanding of where they are at and have key priorities to focus on improving morale. Well, that's great. The key thing there, Joe, is the next step is not for you as a management team to be sitting around the table dissecting all that. That's not your role. Your role now is to create a process by working with, as I said before, a number of employees to start an organisational-wide conversation about the results, warts and all. Get it out there. Get it on the table. Talk about it, and I know you're making this suggestion for the previous person and so forth, but get it out there, talk about it, identify some tangible things that can be done. Don't promise what you can't deliver, and get on and get some runs on the board. Low-hanging fruit first, move on to some of the more difficult things later. So you're going about it the right way, there's no doubt, but what happens with these surveys often is they get left on the shelf or in the computer, and dust settles on them, which is absolutely no good. Okay, so there's another statement there that's we now have a detailed understanding of where. Yep, thank you. Agree. We're going to bring the staff on the bring the staff on the journey and the solutions. Excellent. Openness and transparency is important. You've got it. Yeah, well, keep me abreast with how that goes, Joe, because I'm always interested in that sort of approach, because you're taking people with you. So well done. Anyway, let's get back to what I was saying here before I finish up. You've got, yeah, so we have a narrow selection process. We induct people, showing people where their desk is and all the rest of it. And, you know, we don't really talk about behaviours. We don't really talk about culture. We don't talk about the non-job aspects of what people should be doing. So we're already off on the wrong foot. Then we send people off to training programs, and the training programs are usually technical training programs that are very much around the job role. And then we remunerate people based on the job role. And then we promote people into leadership roles based on the job role. And then we review people based on the job role. And you can see that there's a whole bunch of stuff that's missing. So I think that it would be a good idea to start looking at the non-job roles. I think that's the critically important part. Now, some of you might have seen this before or read about it, and perhaps in the interest of time, we don't have a huge amount of time left, but there's a couple of things I just wanted to finish up on. And one of them is the 5 conversations framework. And if I could just suggest to you this, you're going to get some homework from me, and you will actually each unit, and so you should, because the key thing for you now is to go away and try some stuff. Go away and try some things and see how it works, and then come back and tell me how it works. But what the 5 conversations framework does is give you a bit of a framework to start to talk to people about the non-job roles I just raised earlier on. So what's to stop you having a conversation with people about climate? In other words, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? They say 5. You say, okay, why? So you get them to tell you a little bit about that. And then you say, do you think it's possible to go from a 5 to a 6? And they say, yep. So, well, what has to happen? What do I need to do in order to help facilitate a process where we can get your job satisfaction from a 5 to a 6? And you just build conversations up that build trust up. And I'm very big on this, and I think you should be having regular conversations with people. Strengths and talents looks at what people are good at. What are their innate talents? How can we build upon those things? Is it possible that we can build upon those things? Opportunities for growth. Well, everyone's got opportunities for growth, and it's important that we address those. Out of those 2 conversations, it's highly likely that there's going to be some learning and development needs that will surface. And this isn't necessarily sending people off to programs or enrolling them in Lunch and Learn, my Lunch and Learn series, although you can go for your life on that one. This is really about, it might be showing people how to do something, it might be about explaining things to people, and so forth. And then we talk about innovation and continuous improvement. As I said before, it's one of the roles. So what's to stop you using a framework like that to be having some very targeted developmental and performance conversations with the people that you lead? And once you've done that, you create this ripple effect, because then you can start leaning on them to do the same thing. And I just think that we're not having enough conversations in our organisations generally, and I think it's about time we change the paradigm somewhat. So that's one approach you can use, and of course you'll get some slides on that. What you're seeing here is a very interesting paradox. Just conscious of time. The interesting paradox, because when you talk to people about showing initiative, this is sometimes what happens. In the top cluster there, or top ring, it says leaders want initiative from employees, and employees want to display initiative. So everybody's on the right path or footing to start with. All right. Generally speaking, most employees want to think for themselves. That's what the surveys say. They want to show initiative. Generally speaking, most managers want employees to show initiative. So we're on the same page to start with. And then the leaders actually decide to invite people to show initiative, and some of the employees sit there very skeptically thinking, I don't think my manager really wants me to do this. he or she is a control freak and they're not going to allow me to do this. So I'm just going to sit back. So they sit back and do nothing. And the leader interprets that sitting back and doing nothing at the bottom there as saying that the leaders think, well, there you go. I knew this initiative stuff didn't work. I knew employees didn't want to show initiative. So they jump in and they fill the vacuum. And they come up with the ideas, the thoughts, suggestions, all the rest of it. And guess what? The employee sits there and thinks, I knew it. I knew he or she wasn't really serious about this. And I'm right. And so this thing goes round and round and round like a dog chasing its tail, never catches. And this is a paradox that occurs in our organisations on a regular basis. And we've got to break that paradox. Okay, finally, one last thing to have a think about before we finish up today. Here's 5 more developmental conversations that you can have with people. I would strongly recommend that you look at those conversations in front of you and decide which of those you're perhaps not doing enough of and do a little bit more of them. Coaching is a conversation, and many of you are in senior roles and you should be coaching people on a regular basis, particularly about how to deal with situations and people. And of course, some of you may be in the luxurious position to be someone's mentor. Fantastic. It's a very rewarding conversation or series of conversations being a mentor. Delegation, believe it or not, is a conversation. It's not supposed to be a one-way type of street. You need to get the other person involved in that conversation. The last 2 are very, very sadly neglected. Remember, I started off our presentation today with visions, and I think that not enough of us explain the why of work. Why am I asking someone to do something? And if you can't articulate it, don't expect them to get excited about it, but you should be explaining why you need something the way you need it so that they have a context around that and they understand the implications of it. And the other thing is, I know you're all self-starters, and so am I, but not everybody is. How about some encouragement around the place? How about some pats on the back? How about some actual thank yous? How about some letting people know that you really appreciate the effort that they're making? Could that make a difference? I think so. But of course, we don't see much of that because we're too busy getting the services that we provide the community done to a point where we forget that we're actually in the business of leading people. So there's some conversations that you might like to try as well. So just in closing, we looked at a performance management framework. We talked about the perils of a job description, and I really want to open up the whole concept of performance going beyond the job to the non-job roles. And of course, we looked at some developmental and some performance conversations. So your homework is this, and you know what? You've probably got a few hours before you knock off for a lovely long week. It is a long weekend, isn't it? A lovely long weekend. I wish you all the best for that. But you've still got a chance to start here. How about you start to commit, if you haven't already done it or you don't do it, to a schedule of regular developmental conversations with your direct reports. How about you get into that system right now? Now, you might have started it and dropped the ball, whatever. I'd like you to reinstigate that, and I'd like you to take that very seriously. I'd like you to implement it in your diaries. I would ask you to keep those commitments. There is, in fact, nothing more important than that, in my view, if you're serious about managing performance at your strategic level. It is very important. So I would like to encourage you to start, be bold, and of course I'm going to be following that up in a couple of weeks, and I want to hear some war stories and some of the things that have happened in that space. So guys, that's pretty much it. And you'll notice there in module or unit 2, we'll be covering influencing capabilities, and I'll be sending you a diagnostic. Please get that done. It's critically important because you'll be sitting there in unit 2 wondering what all this terminology is. So complete the diagnostic. You'll find it very useful. It's a profile. Bring it along to the Lunch and Learn for unit 2, and then we'll debrief on it. So thanks, guys. I've enjoyed working with you. Thank you for the really intelligent questions. I hope you've got something useful out of it. And I think we've got another question here. Sorry. Yep. Thanks, Tim. Very engaging. Can't believe that an hour's gone by already. Oh, thank you. That's very kind, Joanne. And Michelle, thank you and goodbye. Yeah, so thanks, everyone.